Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Nolix project. Today we're going to get started with doing a little bit of rough assembly. Again, we are starting on the second big corner of this layout. It's a 180-degree bend, and I'll show you a photo here in just a second. But what we're doing here is we're just doing some rough assembly so we can start getting a little bit of measurements, so we can get a vague idea of where the ramps and grades and all that sort of thing are going to end up going. So I set it off to the side. Here's that module. So again, it's a 180-degree turn. In the corner of the module, it goes into the middle of the layout. So I've got my rough measurements now. So now I'm going to start cutting my final top sheets for the middle deck. And I'm going to use that template that I made in the last episode to go ahead and draw this one. Now, as I mentioned in the previous episode, I actually ended up not using the original template, but I did use it for this, and for that it was actually worth the time and effort to go ahead and put it together. So what I'm doing here is I'm drawing out the grade on what's going to get cut. So this layout's kind of unique because it's got a grade going down through that 180-degree curve, but it's also got a second grade that's going down an additional 4 inches compared to the furthest inside radius. And then underneath all of that, there's actually a grade that's going up. So, you've got grades going in 3 different directions. And so we got to make sure that they're all going to work together and not interact with each other in a negative way. What I'm doing here now is I'm actually taking a piece of 1/2-inch plywood and I'm cutting that bottom ramp. And you'll see where that goes here in just a second. But I started off with something that was roughly about 10 inches wide on one side and narrows down to 6 inches. I did later end up cutting back some of it just to make it a little easier to construct the supports. So, you just very quickly saw it there, but basically I cut in, I left it there long enough to show myself what I needed measurement-wise to cut the piece that I'm cutting now, which is ultimately going to help tie in and make this L or J-shaped module stronger. So, this particular layout was really bad for wasting plywood. So it was a lot of plywood use. The final count, just in 1/4-inch plywood, for example, is 21 sheets of plywood. And then the 3/4-inch stuff, which was all these frames are made out of, is another roughly 20 sheets. So, building in this manner is not the most efficient as far as material use, and I openly admit that. But what it does do is it provides a very strong modular framework that minimizes the need for legs. And for me, that's more important because as you'll see when you see the final video on this in the walkthrough video, this gentleman is actually storing a bunch of stuff underneath the layout. And he does need to be able to get underneath the layout in the middle in particular. So minimizing the number of legs is really kind of important. So again, I've got that piece in the middle there to try and support it. I'm throwing in the surface. Now you can kind of see where the grades are going a little bit. Keep in mind that the forward left side there is actually on a slope, so it's not flat. So it is all actually angling down, and it's kind of like a helix in the respect that it's actually not a flat slope. It actually does, it's super elevated in a respect. And then it's going to continue on to the next module that I make after this as well. So it was pretty important that I make sure that all of those work together and that everything aligned the way it should be. So now I'm cutting some more cross members. I want to make sure that these dual deck brackets are going to support all 3 layers of the benchwork. So I've got that ramp on the bottom that you can see in the background. I've got the middle deck, which is the 1/4-inch plywood, and then the top deck, which really doesn't exist on the left hand of the module so far, but you'll see here shortly. And so what I did is I roughly assembled a module, and this is how I was able to go ahead and measure those heights. So, and I do apologize for zooming through this stuff in high speed fast forward as much as I am, but if I didn't, this episode would be about 5.5 hours long. So I just want to give you guys the highlights, give you a rough idea so you guys know what questions to ask for when you're building your project. So, and as a matter of fact, if you do have questions, leave them down below, because I I usually respond to everything as long as you're polite and respectful. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. And that same goes for email too. As long as you don't get obnoxious about it, I'm more than happy to help you out. So, the idea is to help this hobby grow and make sure that, you can obtain the skills or at least learn the tricks of the trade. So you can do this yourself if you don't want me to do it for you. Now, obviously, if you want me to do it for you, I'm happy to do so. And you can reach out to my website, which is modelrailroadbenchwork.com. But otherwise, feel free to steal any ideas you can from my videos. That's what they're here for. So I've got the cross-member, the dual deck modules in place now. I did go ahead and put some through holes for the bottommost layer. It just happened to work out a little better to better support the middle deck, which is the 1/4-inch plywood sheet, to actually cut a hole versus cutting a slot like the far left-hand side piece has. So, and long term, it just, again, it's going to make for a stronger module. So I just want to make sure that everything holds together well. Not just when I deliver it, but, 10 years, 20 years from now. So, the gentleman I'm building this for, just like myself, isn't getting any younger. So, at some point, somebody's going to lean on this pretty heavy. I want to make sure it doesn't move. So right now I'm building just a face piece, just a simple support. It does have a bunch of different weird angles on it, and I did this for a couple different reasons, but the main reason is I just wanted the finished product to look nicer while it's still being built. Now, ultimately, this whole area will probably end up getting covered up with a piece of fascia that's got a magnet on it or something like that, so it'll probably be solid. But while it's stuck out in the open while the gentleman's building this layout, which is going to be for the next couple of years probably, I want it to look nice and presentable and representative of the quality of work that I do. So I do go through and, spend a little extra time making things fancy. So now what I'm doing here is I've got my bottom cross member. I'm drilling some holes in it. I built the back piece pretty much the same as I built the dual deck brackets. Cut a couple holes in them, and then I'm going to go ahead and secure that in place. Now, one thing I did do that's a little weird on this module from what I normally do is the backside of the 1/4-inch plywood sheet that's going to be installed for this middle deck is actually secured from the top on most of it, but that back edge, it's actually secured from the bottom. So, and you'll see that in just a minute here, but I did that in part because the clearances were that tight. So by the time I got the homosode on this ramp on the underside, I kid you not, I had less than a 1/4 inch of extra clearance. And that's accounting for the clearance I need for just a little bit of extra space. So if he ever runs stacked cars or anything that's a high level car, he's got the clearance he needs. But I know this layout's going to vibrate a little bit, and that sort of thing. So I don't want to make sure there's a little bit of clearance there. But, and doing it the way I did, it actually gave myself an extra 3/4 inch of clearance underneath there. So, for me, it was worth the effort. So a little complicated, but, again, worth it in my book anyway. So now what you've been seeing me do is I've been installing all of the supports, and you see the back piece there. I actually notched it around that center support piece and cut it. Now I'm skipping backwards and I'm going to start installing the homosode. Now, one thing you will notice once you start seeing all the other modules come together and I do the final walkthrough is I'm actually using a lot of scrap homosode. So part of the way I kept the cost down for this client was actually to reuse a good portion of the homosode from his old layout. So in most cases, I did my best to flip the ugly side to the bottom and that sort of thing. I sanded off all the rough edges and that sort of thing. But instead of it being made out of one piece like I normally would for this, it ended up being made out of 5 or 6. And for what he's doing and the way he's modeling his model railroad, that's perfectly fine. He was very happy with the quality of the work and stuff as I delivered it. So I have no problem doing this because ultimately, homosode's kind of getting expensive. It's about $55 a sheet right now. and finding is kind of a pain in the butt. And that's actually one of the holdups on these videos is, doing the final walkthrough video. I couldn't do it because I ended up being 3 sheets of Homosote short, and nobody in the entire Tampa Bay, Orlando area had it in stock for about 3 weeks. So I just got word yesterday that I'm going to be able to get it delivered to the gentleman here in the next couple days. So I'm kind of happy about that. I can finally finalize this project. So you'll notice that I actually split this top 1/4 inch sheet into 2 pieces. So the back piece is actually going to stay permanently, and then the front half is actually removable. Now, long term, it's going to stay there permanently, but for when he's building this layout, he needs to be able to remove that forward piece so he can install the track on that lower ramp. So this is the type of thing, the forethought that you kind of have to take into account with building a layout such as this. Is you have to have access to it. Now, in this case, we probably could have installed the track from underneath, just crawling up underneath there. But for the gentleman, he has difficulty standing and kneeling for long periods of time. So it was better to make this removable so he could sit in a chair and go ahead and install that track from a seated position, buried into this corner, versus making it more difficult than it really needed to be. Now, obviously, I could have installed it for him, but that's not really what we wanted to do in this case. He wanted to do all the track install himself, so I set it up for him to make sure he could be successful in that. So, and then the rest of the Homosote, I just went ahead and stapled it on. I'm using 5/8 staples, so they're only sticking into the 1/4 inch plywood about 3/16 of an inch. So it's still smooth on the bottom side, but it does fully secure the Homosote, and I can kind of go a little nuts with the staples and make sure it's well secured. But ultimately, if he has to remove it, he can. So, and that's kind of the beauty of everything that I build with my style of model railroad benchwork is, you can actually take apart about 95% of what I build with just a couple screwdrivers or a little bit of a pry bar. So I avoid using glue where I don't have to. So obviously if I'm building something curved benchwork or something, that's glued together. But joints and stuff, they're just screws, and that allows a little bit of flexibility in the layout. Okay guys, so the last part of this project was pretty straightforward and pretty much the same thing we've been doing. I just sheeted the top and then I put the Homosote on top. So what we've done here is I've actually taken this long piece, I actually cut it down a little bit so I could open up that last 16 inches. What I was noticing is that it was super tight, and it just wasn't going to look good as a corner, because keep in mind that the user is going to be standing here. So, you have good reach, you might as well be able to use it. So that's what I did there. And realistically, you're not losing a whole lot of space to the support here, and this is all going to get covered up with scenery anyway. But this is about a 1/2 inch. So what I did is I did bring the plywood to the top of the Homosote, which gave me a little bit more strength. So other things that are going on that you saw is this 1/4 inch piece of plywood is actually screwed to the underside of the benchwork here, and then screwed to the surface on the other side. And what that does is that allows me to have no supports under here, and allowed me to make this one section independent of the rest of the module. Specifically because this section here needs to be removable so the person can put the track in on this lower ramp. Coming back around, the only thing I haven't finished on this module yet is I have left this ramp loose, and that's so when I put the next module next to it, I can put those two pieces together and get the final height, because it might go all the way down, it might be somewhere in the middle. I have a feeling it's going to sit somewhere about there, which is about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch above where this cut mark is. So, and what that does is the higher I can get this, the less interaction I'm going to have between it and the trains potentially. So right now this ramp here is wide enough that we can shift the two tracks from center off to the side a little bit and skirt around this ramp that's coming in above it without issue. But I just wanted to make sure I was cautious on it. So another thing is this here, this little notch here, you saw me make that. That was specifically so it lines up with the adjoining module, which is over there at the moment. So I wanted to look consistent, and then I knew I needed to drop it down so I had some extra thickness, so I had some more meat. So I did go ahead and make that a little bit thicker there, and then it wedges down a little bit. The reason why I did this piece here too, and keep in mind this is also on a slope, is I wanted to make sure that this distance was consistent. So we could use this as his DCC shelf, or we could turn it into a closed cabinet. And once I get this there and get it installed and talk to him, then we can talk about doing an upgrade. But I wanted to make sure that it was set up for it. So, and as usual, I've got all of my wiring holes already drilled. I still need to drill a couple here on the bottom, but again, that's another situation where the module isn't done yet. So I've got that next to the joining module right there, but I don't know where things are going to finalize as far as landing. So I wanted to make sure that I had that done first before I start drilling holes in it. So anyway, I hope you guys understand what I've got going on here. This was a stupid complicated module, but I'm glad it's done. It looks really good. Okay, so that module that I flashed in the last segment, I actually took it completely apart. And what I'm doing now is I'm actually cutting in the ramps for the back grade that is ultimately going to be 6.5 inches wide and go up for, it's about 10.5 feet until it hits the main grade height. And then I'm also cutting in the other grades and slopes that I'm going to need for the other areas as well, just to make sure that everything works out and is going to line up the way it should. So, and then I'm going to go ahead and reassemble. So this module is going together much like the other ones. The only added complication on this one is I had a 90-degree corner on a grade with some 45-degree cuts instead of something smooth and where I can just leave it raw. So I'm going ahead and actually using my template that I made in the last episode, and I'm cutting it apart now and using that as material to make this ramp. And ultimately, I actually cut it in the wrong way because I could have actually saved myself a bunch of time and material, but it's make use of what you got and live and learn. So, but this actually ended up turning out pretty well. But the idea here is, again, I was setting the grades. I wanted to make sure that the slope was, consistent and not too overly aggressive. And, here I'm checking to see what my grade needs to be on the middle piece. And I did actually make this piece in 2 pieces just because, it ended up being a little easier and faster to make it. So I went ahead and used a 2-foot deep cross member that I had already made for another module and reused it here, and then I filled in the front half with just something scabbed on. And for the purpose of this, it worked out just fine. So you'll notice I've got it all fit in place. It works out pretty well. And then I'm just going to go ahead and shim and nail this and screw it in place so everything is the way it should be. So, and then I'm going to start cutting in some 3/4 inch plywood to fill in these spots. I'm cutting in the 45-degree angle to make sure that's filled in because ultimately he'll end up putting some sort of a brick or stone facade on there to cover that area. And basically what I'm building here at the moment is just a little triangle, which is going to be the very tail end of a yard on the back of the layout. So it's at the top of the track plan. But anyway, so it's just, a fairly simple, process, but, of course, it's got to be 6 different angles and, 4 different products mixed together to make it work for, what is ultimately just an 18-inch by 18-inch triangle. So here's another one of those little tricks I like to use. So take a piece of scrap that's too big for the area, just go ahead and staple it on, and then use my router to cut it the final size. So no measuring, no tape measures, no pencils, just staple it on and nail away. Installing the back ramp now, which is just a 6.5 inch by 3 foot long piece. So it's going straight, and then I will go ahead and fill in the the missing cross member, and screw on the surface. So anyway, this concludes this episode. I hope you enjoyed. If you have questions, comments, leave those down below. Always don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.